So Artis Stevens is here, and as all of you know, he is our national CEO at Big Brothers Big Sisters, and we have spent the day doing some really amazing things. Well, yesterday we had our tailgate hosted by a couple of our board members at the Steelers game. You got to go see the Steelers play, and then today we spent time talking to the staff and answering questions, which was awesome, and Artis gave a very inspirational speech about why he is in this work, and that was really important to our staff to hear and to understand how they play a part in what we do. And then we went to Primanti's Brothers and made some sandwiches with Pittsburgh famous Tony, who's been there for years and years, and that was awesome.
Had a blast.
Yeah, we had a good time there. And now we get the pleasure of speaking to all of you. So we thought we would just kind of do this conversation style, and I have a few questions for Artis, and then you all can certainly ask questions as well. I'm sure he'd be happy to answer them.
Absolutely.
But we, first I just wanted Artis to kind of introduce himself and why you do the work that you do.
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you all. And it's a pleasure to be in Pittsburgh. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you. And before I start talking anything about myself, I'm going to talk about this lady here, right? I'm just proud. Thank you so much. I am proud to be here and to be a partner with Becky and the team. And what she didn't mention is, yes, I'm a Steelers fan. Absolutely. All the way I've been a Steelers fan since I was 7 years old. But I'm also just a fan of passionate people that are making incredible impact in their communities and leaders. And that's what she's doing, and that's what she's leading this entire organization, led by a board that is inspiring, led by a group of professionals and staff and volunteers who are engaging. So for me, as I've been making a trip, and I'm on number 14, this is the last one for the year, number 14 14 trips in about 3.5 months. I'm rounding it off here, and I'm just really excited about what I'm seeing in this community and the partnership that we're building nationally. So I want to say just kudos to you first and foremost. Let's give her a round of applause. Here's what I'll just share about myself, and I'm not sure how many of you who know me or have been engaged from what some of the national work has been since I've been here. I'll be 2 years at the national office in January. So the end of January will be my 2-year anniversary. What I'll share with you is, I come from a background that is very similar to a lot of the young people that you serve. And for me, what was really important was coming to an organization that I felt connected to and felt a sense of mission attraction with as well. Come from a large family, 8 of us, youngest kid. I grew up in a small town called Brunswick, Georgia, Southeast Georgia, for those of you who are trying to market below Savannah, above Jacksonville, right there on the coast. And excuse me a little bit because I've been losing my voice the last week here. So as I grew up, my mom and dad used to tell me something that just really was important for how we were raised. And the idea was that, we didn't have a lot of means growing up, but they always instilled in us that we were rich in relationships, right? That was our currency. That was our currency of growing and living. And we always had a village, right? If I left home and I did something bad, you better know by the time I got home, my mom and my dad already knew about it because a neighbor had already picked up the phone and called and said, hey, Artis getting into trouble like 3 blocks down the road, which happened quite often. So the build of that, though, and what was really was important about that is that our community and my household was always this living village of people, of mentors, of connectivity. My mom was the anchor in our family. My dad was a preacher. My granddad was a preacher. Everyone thought I was going to be a preacher. And I remember I went to my dad and I said, hey, am I going to be a preacher like you? Because that's what everyone is telling me. And the words that he shared with me are what stuck with me my entire life. And part of it was my motivation for being here today. And it was, everyone has their ministry in this world. You have to find yours, right? Everyone has their ministry in this world. You have to find yours. That line and all the actions that followed, it relieved me. It empowered me, but it relieved me. It relieved me from the pressure of generational expectation that I had to follow in my dad's footprint, right? It relieved me from the idea that I had to be boxed into what I looked like, where I grew up, how much money we had. But it was this idea that I was empowered by my own choices, by my own hard work, by my own faith, by my own dream and aspiration. And that is something powerful to be able to give a young person, right? This sense of access, this sense of dream, and the sense of potential and possibility. It helped me to be the first in my family to graduate and go to college. Go Dogs, by the way. I'm not sure we got any in here, but I'll say it anyway. National championship, but we won't talk about that. But long story short, to sort of get to the roundabout here, I've spent the last 25 years of my career working in youth development, following my ministry, empowering young people to change the world. That's what I truly believe. And I've worked in so many different organizations, Boys and Girls Clubs, 4-H, consulting for YMCA. You know, I've been around, I've built public and private partnerships, worked with the top corporations and companies that do private and public partnerships and cause marketing. And here's what I'll tell you, that in 2020, when a lot was going on in our world, and it still is, but we had a pandemic that was at its height, social isolation, schools closed, social injustices headlines all across our country. There was a name for me that stuck more than anything else during that moment. And his name was Ahmaud Arbery. And for those of you who know that name in this room, Ahmaud Arbery was murdered on the streets of Brunswick, Georgia for being black. The reason why that name resonated is that if you heard the beginning of my story, Brunswick, Georgia is my hometown. The street that Ahmaud was murdered on was the street that I walked on many times as a kid. I know people in his family. That moment for me crystallized something. It didn't make me doubt what my dad had told me when I was young about my ministry. But what it did make me, it made me challenge if I was doing enough to pursue it, if I was doing enough to give back, if I was doing enough to be connected to what that ministry was. And it was about 2.5, 3 weeks later that Big Brothers Big Sisters reached out. And I knew it, right? I knew it when I saw this organization. It was like looking in the mirror. I saw myself in the kids that we serve. That same kid that just needed access, that just needed opportunity, that just needed empowerment, right? Had everything in the world that they needed, but they just needed the nudge, the push, the chance, right? That's all. Not a savior, just an opportunity. The platform for that. Is that what this mission and this organization has been all about, right? I see it in the people and the connection, the people around this room, the people that I've had the chance to meet since I've been in this organization, who give of their time, who give of their voice, who give of their dollar, who give of their investment, who give of their energy to ensure that this organization continues to thrive. And most importantly, the young people, the families and communities. And it's the partners, the community that's around, that make sure that we have a thriving village that allows young people to feel empowered and to grow, and to let those young people lead the way so that they're the ones that helps to change our communities, to help change things in society, because we know that's the ultimate way. So I appreciate you all having me here. I'm really excited to have an opportunity to engage with you deeply, and let's look forward to do some good work together.
That Artis mentioned during our conversation this morning was this word innovation.
Yeah.
And speaking to how Big Brothers Big Sisters really started as an innovative program. And so I'm going to ask him to explain a little bit more about what he means by that. But also, you know, Pittsburgh, we are a city of innovation and the Steel City, and we're looking as we grow to use innovation and technology to really help boost our economy and all the things that we do here. So I would love to hear a little bit about, you know, kind of your thoughts on innovation, how we started, and then how does that connect to what we're doing today?
Yeah.
And how can that impact what we're doing in our region as well?
Yeah. So it's a great question, Becky. And what I won't do is bore you with a history lesson, but I do want to just ask, how many of you know how Big Brothers Big Sisters was started, right? By hands. Yeah. So for those of you who are unfamiliar with how we were started because kids were being sent through the juvenile justice system, right? So you're talking about in New York City, here's what was happening. Kids who were, by the way, mainly immigrants, right? And they were immigrants, in this case, from Europe, right? So they were immigrants. Many of them were homeless. Many of them were street gangs, right? But what was happening is that kids had all of these incredible young people who had all this potential, but they didn't have opportunity. They didn't have discretion. They didn't have access to things. So what they did was they found groups and they found connections in ways that they could. Those typically were things in terms of crime, right? Getting into delinquent behaviors. So there was this court clerk that said, why are we sending kids through the juvenile justice system when there's so much more opportunity that we can be doing, right? Our organization was found as an innovation. It was an alternative innovation to the juvenile justice system. So I set that up and I tell people that all the time because what we are and the foundation speaks to who we are today. If you think about why our organization was founded as an alternative to the juvenile justice system, right? Alternative to justice, still about giving kids justice, but in a very different way than sending them to the court system. That it was all about creating equity for the young people that we were serving. So how do we create a more equitable environment so that these young people have an opportunity, access, empowerment, just like any other kid would have? That the way we were founded, but also the way we grew was because of diverse people, diverse communities. If you look at our founding, it was founded in our scaling particularly by religious organizations, by Rotary clubs, right? By corporate, educational institutions. Every single background that you can imagine in this country were part of not only our founding, but also our scaling. And then the idea was that every kid had the opportunity to feel included, that you can belong in this place, that you, no matter your background, your identity, what you came from, what you look like, how much money you made, you had a place. Justice, equity, diversity, inclusion. That's why we call ourselves a Jedi-focused youth empowerment organization. It's not because of a headline. It's not because this is the new thing and the thing we want to sort of be on edge. It's because it's in our DNA. And the reason why I say that, Becky, and it sort of translate, is that if you fast forward now 118 years, remember this is 118 years ago. If you fast forward 118 years, look at who we're serving now. Look at what's happening in our country right now and why it's so important. We have 1 in 3 kids in this country that don't have access to a positive mentor outside of their family. Think about that. 30,000 kids nationally. I know there are a number here in Pittsburgh, 30,000 kids nationally on our waiting list. Most of those kids are boys. If you think about what's happening across the sense of when you look at the young people that we serve, about 2/3 come from communities of color. You look at that, about 55% live in poverty, 60% single-led family household, 25% has a parent that's incarcerated or in the parole system. Now, here's the biggest thing that I can tell you about all those statistics. None of those stats define who our kids are. None of them. What does define them is their opportunity, their access, and their empowerment. Because when we get that right, the statistics that we know define them and that empower them is that 90% of our kids are more successful in school because they have positive mentors and relationships in their life. They are more socially engaged and socially active and socially connected in terms of giving back and contributing to their society. That they make better choices when they're involved in Big Brothers, Big Sisters. This is not stuff that I just see from Antidote. We just finished doing, or we're right now in a 5-year longitudinal study, right, with University of Chicago, Illinois, to actually prove this out. And we're seeing the models of effectiveness that our kids are more likely to have pro-social, proactive, community skills, supportive skills, academic success, but also skills and behaviors that keep them away from things that would be exposure to them and negatively. This is the power of our brand. This is the power of the innovation we do. So when you think about innovation, if you can have a model that was founded on innovation, imagine what we can do to address what's happening in our communities today. And you're going to hear us talk more and more about the idea of 1-to-1 plus, right? And 1-to-1 plus is a very clear concept. It is, we will never stop doing what is our traditional bread and butter, which is 1-to-1 traditional mentoring. That is who we are. That's who we are, been for 118 years. That will continue. What we're saying, though, is that if we're going to continue to evolve and enhance and to meet families, to meet kids and meet communities where they are, we have to take steps to ensure that we're evolving with them. And what does that mean? It means that we got to be plus. If we say 1-to-1 plus, we got to be plus people. And it's the idea that, yes, the big and the little, but it's also the parent. It's also the staff member. And it's also this broader community. So we're talking about creating an ecosystem. Young people are in the system, in the center. So how do we create a bigger and broader ecosystem that supports them? We do this already. It's just about putting intentionality to the work. So when Becky and her staff are seeing a young person who's hungry or who has mental health challenges, they don't need to be the direct provider, but they see something that many people will not see. So how do our services build out to be able to bring the right connects in a young person's life and their family, plus experiences? Many people have heard me talk about group mentoring, serving kids 18 plus. Our fastest growing population that we're serving nationally today, fastest growing, is 18 and older. Why is that? Think about this. Kids are in our system right now. Kids are in our program. They're in our model. What happens when they graduate? They're asking the question, what do I do next? So where our agencies are responding, they're saying, we're not going to leave you alone. We're going to be there. So now they're putting much more focus towards career mentoring, right? When do you get to the next place? Education, entrepreneurship, employment, enlistment. So how do we get you to the next step? And then companies are coming to us to say, listen, we need a deeper pipeline. We need to be able to go into more diverse communities, but we don't have a bridge to get there and to start at young people to really give them exposure. Big Brothers Big Sisters is a solution to that, to bring folks together, right? It becomes an innovation. Group mentoring is not just for group mentoring's sake. And we're not saying it's a replacement for one-to-one at all. What we are saying, though, if I'm a man and I'm a black man and I have a level of uncomfortability about coming and being a one-to-one mentor for a lot of reasons in my life and a lot of reasons culturally, does group mentoring give me an opportunity to get connected into that space? Does it make me feel a bit more comfortable to get my toe wet and get into the mission? And then can it be a pipeline for a deeper level of engagement that we can ultimately get involved in? If we're going to be, and all of you are titans of industry and leaders, right? And one thing you know about product is that if your product is not evolving and getting more innovative and meeting your customer demand, then you ultimately don't have a strong product that's going to be ready to be able to meet the demand for your future. That's the process that Big Brothers Big Sisters is in right now. That's the importance of innovation. And the primary core of innovation, and we can talk about this in a second, has to be about how we see volunteers coming into our network. Because if we don't crack that puzzle, if we don't really look at how we think about our volunteers, not just as a volunteer coming in, but almost even more as a customer coming in with a customer-like experience, then we're missing the boat in terms of how we create the right experience and innovation with them.
Yeah. I'm going to give you a chance to get it.
Thank you.
So that is something that we have been talking about at Big Brothers Big Sisters Greater Pittsburgh, is that whole volunteer experience and what does that look like and how do we serve the people who are doing the mentoring as well as the mentee. I mean, they are the program, so it's really important for us to continue to do that really well. So that's something that we're looking at as we embark on our next strategic plan. It will definitely be part of that. So National just put out their strategic plan, your strategic plan, and we're going to use that to help inform what we do. So tell us a little bit about the main points in that, and then we'll let all of you ask some questions after we do that.
So it's a network-wide strategic plan, right? What I love about this plan, and it was very deliberate, is that we spent 20 months getting to this plan. It wasn't, hey, let me sit somewhere on high and share the plan. Here it is, right? Wasn't that. It was listening. This plan is an evidence of listening and working in collaboration. And what I'm most proud of is that the hundreds of focus groups we did, the countless surveys that we did, that the fingerprints of this plan are the fingerprints of our network, not of the national office. It's our network. We call it our network-wide strategic plan. Now, will it be something that we hope, and the resources that we're providing, which you're going to see, I think, either this week, is how do you take this network-wide plan and localize it, right? So it may not be apples to apples, but it may be things that you can take. And then as you start your strategic plan process, ensure that there's alignment, because our power is a federated model. The more we're consistent, the more that we have power. We got to use our advantage, right? The power of Big Brothers Big Sisters is a brand that is all across this country. So why not use and harness that power versus do it alone, right? So the plan is essentially this. It's a big vision, and our big vision is around growth with impact. It means we have to grow to reach more kids with this mission. with the power of mentoring. And we have to move the needle on their lives. That's the impact side, growth and impact. Here's the other thing I'll say about that. Growing to reach more kids and make an impact doesn't just mean we're doing it alone. That means it has to be centered in partnership, and it has to be centered in how do we help to advocate for others who are in this mentoring mission, so that the idea of every kid getting access, because it's not pleasing to me if we say we grow our mentoring role, so we start serving 1 million kids or 2 million kids. Well, if we haven't helped the entire mentoring field to get better, we're not doing our jobs, because our goal has to be 1 in 3 kids don't have mentoring. So our goal has to be, how do we not only serve, but how are we the advocate, the thought leader, to ensure that everybody has access, right, and has opportunity. That's the big ambitious goal, so that we empower every kid to graduate with a plan for their future and a mentor whose impact lasts a lifetime. Every kid, every opportunity. We said there are 4 accelerators, and I'll say these quickly because there are 4 R's. So when you see this 40-page plan, which is very deep, it's 4 R's. Reach, what I just said about reaching kids, and the way that we're going to reach kids is with that 1-to-1 plus model that allows us to be much more accessible, open, provide more opportunities, but it has to be fueled by volunteers, right? And the volunteer principle for us is really clear. We have to make more volunteers aware of our mission and our work. So you're going to see a lot more about the communications, the campaigns. We're going to talk much more about that. It has to be about the burden and the obstacle of why volunteers don't connect with us. And a lot of that is about time, and it's about the burden of mentorship, that they don't feel like they're the perfect mentor, or they feel like it's too much, right? So how do we distinguish that, not just in marketing, but within our program, and giving people different ways and entry points? And then one that's really big, the third one, experience. I just mentioned this to the staff. Nationally, our conversion rate is about 20%. 100 volunteers come into our doors nationally, 100 volunteers. For every 100 volunteers comes into our door nationally, only 20 convert. And what that means, for those of you in terms of may not be as familiar with our model, when you raise your hand to volunteer to become a big, right? So once you identify and you say, I want to become a big, and you go through whatever step, conversion means you go all the way through the process, and then you ultimately become a big. So out of every 100 that comes in our door, only 20 make it. What is happening? What is happening that 80 people out of 100 are not making it? And then what happens to the 80 people? There's going to be natural attrition. We all know that. But what happens to the 80 people, right, that are not making it? And then what are we doing with them, right? So the idea has to be, we must understand. So we're doing a lot of work in terms of insights, right? And that's not the sexy stuff. I will give you that. But it's the important stuff, because if we don't understand our customer, we can't serve them well, right? So it's understanding what's happening. And then secondly, it's going to be about what is the experience for a big, for someone who's a potential big. So when they knock on the door, do they feel welcome? Is there a welcome mat? Do you feel like you belong? Because it just can't be about making sure our kids belong, because if our bigs don't feel like they belong, we haven't truly created the powerful match, right? And this is what I hear Becky talking about in the work that you all are doing here in Pittsburgh, that there's opportunity for that. And then the thing that I'll say in terms of the other R's here, relevance, 20 million alumni, 20 million across the country. People who've been bigs, people who've been littles, people who've been connected to this brand. Where do you start when you're trying to bring volunteers, fundraising, donors, community partnerships, the people who've been connected? I've heard many of you tell me that you've been bigs. Few of you tell me you've been littles, right? So where do you start? You start with the people who have connection to this mission, because they've been your greatest advocates. Right now, we're not doing that as much as we need to. So our role is, how do we bring back? We're launching this alumni initiative so that we can bring those folks back into the circle. And then we have to have the technology, which is why we're launching this CRM platform network-wide, to allow our agencies to then use a CRM, a constituent relationship management system, so they can be able to go through and say, how do we cultivate these relationships and build these people into our fold much more effectively? Revenue has to be sustained, has to be unrestricted, has to be much more geared towards our operating. Why is that? because we can't survive as an organization if we're only funding restricted and programmatic operations. So for those of you who may be donors in the room, right, I get it, right? You want that nice program, that shiny thing. If we don't fund what's under the hood, it's called trust-based philanthropy, right? If we don't fund what's under the hood, an organization can't sustain. We're built on the idea that we have to ensure that we have a compelling and powerful mission that can fund what's under the hood. The other thing I'll say about revenue is that 71% of givers and donors in this country are individuals. About 14% of our network revenues come through individuals. There's a huge gap. I'm not saying we're going to be 71%, but we got to be higher than 14%, right? And if any mission is geared towards individual engagement, it's this mission and the power to be able to drive individuals. That starts with leadership. It starts with boards. It starts with the idea of how do we start doing much more around individual giving, individual ask, building programs that allow people to come into not just companies and corporations and government, but allow more individuals to come into our cause. We're already built for it. And then the final one is resources. And that's all about people. It's the people and the staff. So we're building a model called the hub model that's allowing the national office to work more effectively in terms of having boots on the ground to support our agencies, right? Technical support, coaching, support, training, et cetera. But it's also about mentor agencies. So one of the biggest things that you're going to hear come from the national office is the idea of how do we better support agency to agency training, coaching, and mentoring. We don't believe the best ideas come from the national office. I'll tell you, I don't believe the best ideas come from the national office. I believe the best ideas are right here. So my job has to be, how do I elevate what's happening here and in other markets so that Pittsburgh can feed off of other markets that are happening? Because maybe Becky doesn't have access to that right now. What I can do is try to build a platform that allows her to have more access and more people to have access to her. And then secondly, if you all are doing some really great things here, which you are, for some things, how do we put much more investment nationally around getting leaders in a Pittsburgh market to be able to teach, coach, and support much more nationally or regionally? Or if there are smaller markets around the Pittsburgh area, how do we help those agencies as well with what you do? And you said, well, I wish I could do it, and most of the time I can, but if it was something that required greater scale, then that's where the national office should be partnering and saying, well, how can we help to give you a broader platform and greater scale to create those types of opportunities? So hopefully that gives you just a brief peek into what you'll see as you see much more around our plan. And there is so much more to come. And of course, much more I could talk about.
Thank you. So around our table here, we have funders, we have bigs, we have littles, we have so many different perspectives. So I would love to give all of you the chance to, and our staff too, to ask any questions that you might have of Artis about either, what we're doing regionally, nationally, whatever you want to focus on.
I can hardly believe it's been 2 years since you joined the organization. It's been a lot that's gone on in 2 years. As you joined the organization, was there any surprises, anything that you didn't expect?
Yeah, I sort of didn't expect a pandemic. So yeah, beyond that, I will say, but it's related to the pandemic. Probably what I did not expect. I felt coming in at the height of the pandemic, I felt like I was going to be disconnected from this network, right? Because I wasn't able to go out there and travel and do the things you would ordinarily do when you're a first-time CEO coming into an organization, and then people receiving you, right? I was surprised out how much I was received in this organization from afar. I say from afar because it was all virtual, right? And the receptiveness that I got into this organization has been amazing. The other thing that I was really surprised about, I knew it, I just didn't know the depth, the innovation on the local level. I didn't know the depth of innovation, and I saw it, and not how just folks were pivoting because of the pandemic, but what they were doing to meet the needs of the kids and the families that they were serving. And I will tell you, Dave, it gave me an appreciation for what was to come. So when it all started and I started learning about here were some of the challenges, and people were like, just like telling me very straight up, hey, here's what I'm facing. Here's what we're going through right now. It laid a groundwork for us to be able to work more effectively in terms of planning together, right? Because I think what I was able to get in a very concise, condensed way is things sped up. I don't know if that makes sense, but the pandemic caused things to speed up, right? Because people were more receptive about doing innovative things, right? They were already happening locally, but nationally, it was, well, we don't have any choice, right? So we had to do things and test things and try things that we ordinarily probably would have taken time. And we said, well, let's do 10 pilots over 10 years, right? It sped up. Everything sped up. Locally, it was this idea to say, hey, we got to do things much more collaboratively together, not just in our markets, because things had to speed up. So the surprise of the innovation, the surprise of what was going on during the time became much more of a stimulant, if you will. It stimulated the speed of our planning process and the intentionality that we had towards working together as a network.
Mm-hmm. My name is Karen Rollins-Fitch. I'm from Highmark Hole Care, and I have a kind of a twofold.
Yeah.
So, in the volunteer space, are you finding it more difficult to get long-term volunteers that want to be committed to stay for an extended period of time? Because, is my thought process incorrect that that's kind of how Big Brothers and Big Sisters needs to work? Because in order to really make an impact with a little, you don't need to bounce in and bounce out. You need to kind of get in there and stay.
Yeah. So and you said two parts, or
Well, that's
I'll take that one.
okay.
So I think across the country, you're seeing much more challenge in volunteer engagement, right? We're seeing, it's just the trend that you're seeing across the country. I think what we are finding, though, is that people are still wanting to volunteer. They just want the dynamics to look different, right? That's what I think that's what we're seeing in our markets, and that's what I mean by responding and responding very differently. So on the average, our average, what we call match length, right? It's the average amount of time for a big and a little. Is on average about 3.5 years formally. We all know that's not the reality. You hear it here is that once you get matched, you're pretty much matched for life, right? And it's the big who really pushes it, which is a powerful thing. But what we're finding for a lot of folks is because you have a lot of different things, and I'll tell you one of the biggest one, give you a perfect example, workplace mentoring. As more companies have become telecommuting companies, the entire idea of workplace mentoring has changed, right? So it's not as straightforward as what it used to be when we used to think we can just bring in, kids or bring adults into the schools, because schools have changed in the model. So we're having to adjust and adapt to that, to your question. The way we are adapting is in a number of different ways. I think some of it is understanding that your model has to truly be based. Some folks are going deeper into community-based mentoring as well, but also understand that your model has to be supplemented. And one of the perfect examples I can give you of that is the way that we're now using technology-enhanced mentoring. Technology-enhanced mentoring is not a replacement for in-person. It will never be. What we are finding, and we're doing this much more on, we're starting where we're focusing in, is much more on older youth to start this off, is to say, what if it can be a supplement? Because you're right. You may not get that mentor or that young person, for that matter, to say, hey, I'm going to meet 2 times a month. But what if we can get one in person and then one virtual, right? And then that virtual one becomes much more of a career coaching, career counseling kind of session, right? And then so you're finding agencies are saying, hey, we're going to adapt our model a little bit, the way that we thought about it traditionally, to meet more and use technology. And it can't just be technology in the same way that we used it previously, right? Most of it, I will tell you, you're seeing much more move to app-based. It's not going through Zoom. It's right, because kids have their phones. They don't want to sit down on a computer, right? They want their phones. So some of it's app-based. Some of it is still using our safety protocols, supervised protocols, different things that we do. But we're having to look at different ways to be able to meet the needs. And then the last thing I'll say is I mentioned group mentoring, right? What we're starting to see, because we are looking at research behind group mentoring. There's already a lot of research out there, but we're looking at how it works for our network. What we're also starting to see with group mentoring is the idea of peer-to-peer persuasion, right? So Dave may not want to do it alone, but man, if his friends, if you get 2 or 3 of his friends to come and do it with him, and it's a group of kids, right? It becomes a little different, right? So we create the social atmosphere into the connection that Dave has for his social connections, as well as his sense of doing good, right? And those things don't have to be mutually exclusive, right? They can build, but it takes us looking at how do we want to meet our end result, and then think about the means of how we get there a bit more differently and innovatively. Doesn't mean that we're sacrificing who we are as an organization. It just means that we have to think a bit more innovatively about how we get to our end, right? With how our model and how our delivery system is.
Thank you. So the second part of that was kind of, and you kind of answered it,
Mhm.
was how do I take this back and sell it better in a corporate setting? Because you're right, the struggle of people working from home and actually doing all of the volunteer that they typically would have done previously is a lot more difficult. I guess we'll say post-pandemic.
You're the health guy.
Yeah. Can I tell you then what we're hearing from companies, right? And I'll give you another side of this. What we're hearing, and we work with, so we work, of course, with a lot of companies, number of them that have relationships right here in Pittsburgh, but we work with a lot of companies, and some of the things that they're telling us is that they're actually having issues because when their folks are disconnected from the workplace, they don't have the organizational connect, the purpose connect. So they're actually coming to us for the purpose connect, right? They're coming to us to say, and I'm telling you, I've had like 10 of these conversations in the last 3 months with different companies who will say, hey, my folks I can't create the environment that I want to create culturally inside the workspace because people are not coming anymore. So they're sitting at home, but then they become more disconnected, all right? They don't have their colleagues to be able to connect with. So how can I help? And it's not we're the only answer to that, but what we're finding is that we are a pivotal answer to that. And that's what I would say to you in terms of solution. When we think about what's happened with companies and their sense of employee engagement and how they want to sort of drive ESG goals, which we've been part of that conversation, particularly around the social side of it. When we think about the idea of how do we allow people to give back into their communities that they are, but they're looking for something of scale. And that's the other thing that we provide, that a number of companies who may say, and they may even be here in Pittsburgh, they may say, well, that's great, but if we did something, we want it to have more regional basis on it. If we want to have national, we come to the table and we can give both regional and national in addition to Pittsburgh. The other thing I will say is the other piece that we've been hearing is that we can't find the talent. I'm not a believer in that, right? We can't find the talent and the pipeline to be able to get more people exposed to our XYZ industry, right? Or what we do. I think there is a huge play. There already is, and there already has been, but I think there's a huge growing space for Big Brothers Big Sisters to be in this space, because with programs like Big Futures, which is our career development program, it's allowing us to then go to companies and to say, you want to start earlier? You want to start with more access to the communities who you say you can't reach? We can provide that. And here's the other thing. When you're talking about HBCUs or other types of colleges or community colleges, we're building relationships in there as well. So that's only to say, and by the way, I'm giving you just more of a national scope. Becky, of course, can give you much more of a local scope. There are ways that we can broker and talk about the advantages that a Big Brothers Big Sisters or a powerful mentoring organization can play in the corporate community, and particularly in environments that workplace and people feeling more connected to their workplace.
So make sure you connect with Kurt Lester here afterwards, because we have a workplace program with them. It's working pretty well. We've been there a number of years, and I'm sure he can tell you more about why some of the people there volunteer. We were talking earlier about how it has been really useful in getting people to want to come back into the office as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, like we do ours on Friday.
Yeah.
Friday just happens to be the day that everybody wants to work remote. But the commitment, I mean, people are like, no, I will be there on Friday because they have that commitment to their little. And I was going to ask you, just if you look at other regions, maybe share some numbers on how many workplaces participate. Because I've heard the number of workplaces here, and I feel like it should be triple or more the number that actually participate. I'm just kind of wondering.
We have, so I can probably speak more towards companies. Network wide, right? This is not national relationships, this is network wide. So local, we have about 365 different companies that we work with in workplace mentoring programs, some form of workplace mentoring program. They all differ. They're also the different relationships. They all have different degrees in terms of how, like you just mentioned, different engagements, different places. I will tell you what we find as a commonality is very true to what you just said, right? It's about value, right? And the way that they're built, we never approach it as, hey, just do something for the kids, right? Which we know that's why we're in the mission that we're in. But we also know that the reality is that there has to be a value exchange, right? And the value exchange may be for a company that, yes, my employees are going to feel much more engaged, right? It is going to give me much more of a lever and an opportunity to do maybe some of the things you get more people into the workplace, right? There is going to be the pipeline value. There is going to be the certain things that I want to get my C-suite. We're doing, one of the big things that we started doing is doing more what we call solution-based immersion sessions with young people. Essentially what that is X company has a solution they're trying to figure out, and they want some innovation, and they want a different type of audience to come into innovation. We're bringing young people in, right? And they're sitting there, but just did this with Macy's. The entire Macy's C-suite came in New York, and we brought in 18 to 22-year-old kids. They were sitting all around the table just like this, but they were like work groups. And it was crazy to see like the CEO of Macy's, like with his sleeve rolled up, sitting there, and then they were explaining their brand. The kids audited their brand because they were like, well, how do we reach kids and young people at this stage and age? And they were auditing their website and they presented to Macy's, right? And here's the power of that. It was valuable for Macy's, of course, but it was valuable for those young people, right? Pretty much that entire class are all now moving to get jobs, right? And they're using Macy's execs as references as well, right? But that's the beauty, right? When you do this and you do it, it becomes this beautiful magic, right? That we can make work. The question is how do we harness it, right? So it just doesn't become organic, it becomes something intentional. And that's the power of Big Brothers Big Sisters, right? You have incredible people, incredible staff. It's about just making it intentional. So how do we build? And back to what Becky had mentioned earlier, innovation is not something that just happens, right? Innovation has to be created, has to have a space where it can be allowed and empowered to grow and happen. And I think that starts with partnership. Partnership of a board, partnership of community players, partnership of staff. It has that partnership because when folks like you are around the table, to me, that's where innovation starts to grow and it starts to expand. The only folks I will say that will be important when those discussions really start to take off, that will need to be around this table are young people, right? And when they're around the table with you, I'm hoping that we are in this next year, we're going to be launching a National Youth Advisory Council. And it's going to be a group of young people who are going to be advising us nationally, consulting us on our plan, how we implement it, what we should be thinking about, and holding us accountable, right, to the work that we need to do. And it's something we're going to be encouraging more of our agencies to do. It doesn't mean you have to have a National Youth Advisory Council, but some form of youth insight and youth input to be able to guide your work and to guide your direction, because their ideas, of course, and their energy is what helps us to truly lead and change.
Thanks for coming.
I'm glad to be here.
Your thoughts and ideas with us. I appreciated your description of the work you all are doing in justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. When I think about justice work, especially when I think about racial justice,
Yes.
I think about it from the lens of disrupting systems of oppression that have oppressed many of the kids of color that you all work with.
Yeah.
And so I'm curious how you see Big Brothers Big Sisters positioned to disrupt those systems of oppression.
Yeah.
And what are the strategies to do that?
Yeah. So I'll probably frame it a little differently, right? But still rooted into what you just said. I'm a true believer that, so I always told that, and our team talks about what's our role, right? What's our role in the discussion around social justice? I think we play a really important role. I'm going to get back around to what you said, but I want to explain this because it's going to help to answer what you just said, or at least give you my POV on it. When I look at our role, sort of in the discussion around social justice, I think at the foundation, we are a youth empowerment organization, right? And I call us a Jedi Youth Empowerment Organization. We're a youth empowerment organization. That's our origin. That's who we're about. That's the lane that we play in, right? There are great partners that we have, whether you talk about National Urban League, HRC. I mean, I can go down the list, right? We're not those organizations. We partner with those organizations. We are a youth empowerment organization, and it's knowing that we're a youth empowerment organization. So one, I always talk about authenticity. You got to be true to why you were founded, what your purpose is, and ultimately where you're trying to go. When you talk about the social justice lens, there are two things that I think are really important in terms of how our organization model is built. And they're on two sides of the spectrum. One is we are the organization, 70% of the kids, I told you, close to 70% of the kids we serve are from communities of color. Another 70% of our volunteers are white. So I look at that, and those are the two sides that I look at. So here's one aspect of that. Do we need more representation of communities of color and more attraction and making communities of color feel like they belong? Because that's really what it is. It is ensuring that it's not that communities of color don't want to volunteer for Big Brothers Big Sisters. It's about how we attract them. It's about how do they feel when they come and they approach, and the belonging and the connection to the work that they do and to the sense of being a volunteer, right? Do people relate to me when I come and I say I want to be a big? We need more representation, and that's something that our work and our focus is going to be attracting on. And you can't get representation if you don't have people that look like you within your organization at every level of your organization, right? So when we talk about creating and disrupting sometimes just starts from the infrastructure of who you are, right? People would call me a disruptor because my board was 15% of communities of color, 10% or maybe a little bit over 15% women. My board is now 40% women, 40% community of color, right? Because what we said, and I had the opportunity to do, I don't think that just happens overnight. I had the opportunity to do it. But I said that if we're going to truly be about who we're about, then we either got to sort of make a more substantial change here, or we got to create the pipeline that allows for people to come into our organization and have access to it, right? The other part was staff, right? That if I come and I see your organization and I see no one who looks like me, or I have no interaction or engagement with people that connect with me, do I feel like I really belong? Do I feel like culturally I really belong? And I'm not just saying that from a race standpoint. I think that's from a lot of different myriads of backgrounds and experiences, that people gotta feel like they belong and they feel connected and see themselves in our mission. So I think there's a representation piece, excuse me, and a lot of that's gonna start with the work that we do in terms of how we hire people, how we develop, how we coach, which is why we're putting intentionality in our JEDI strategy towards people development, coaching, hiring, talent retention, and growth. There's another side though, which is allyship. And I always tell people the 70-70 that I mentioned, I'm also proud of what I see in this, because Big Brothers Big Sisters, like a lot of organizations, is an organization that bring people together and connect people to see things that they don't see, right? So for a lot of our bigs who work with communities, that may be their first experience seeing a community that looks like that. Their eyes get open. They get more wider experience. They get much more engaged. For our littles, sometimes it's the way that they see the world, and they get to see a different culture and get access and exposure. I don't want this to be an either or discussion. It needs to be an and plus discussion. So kids need mentors and backgrounds from people from all different backgrounds, all different experiences. And I never want our scenario for Big Brothers Big Sisters to be one that you have to choose if you're a kid, or you got to choose if you're a model. You should be able to have it all, right? What made me enriched is that I had mentors who looked exactly like me, and they were incredible. But I had mentors who looked exactly opposite from me and came from opposite backgrounds, and they helped to make me who I am today as well. Now, I'm getting back to the core of what you just said. In the center of what I just said is youth empowerment. So ultimately, I think our main area of disruption is how we empower young people to be disruptors. That's what I'm getting to. That we're not the advocacy agency that's going to be out there, saying, hey, here's what needs to happen with social justice, and here's what needs to happen X, Y, and Z. Do some of our leaders play a role in that? Absolutely. What I will tell you our advocacy is advocacy for young people. And when young people are equipped with voice, when they're equipped with empowerment, when they're equipped with the idea to be able to succeed and thrive, and then they can make positive choices and affect their communities and contribute to their communities, that's where I think our biggest framework, our biggest foundation for helping disrupt change, right? Positive change in the way that it needs to go. So again, it's just my perspective, or I'm sure many people have a million different other ones, but that's sort of how I see the work that Big Brothers Big Sisters does to ensure that young people then can become the contributors to society and disrupt in a way that's going to be positive in terms of racial justice, other social justice areas.
So start within our own organization, and then figure out how to empower students so that they can disrupt up there.
Absolutely, right? And what I find, and what I think, where I feel like this organization has the ability to go, we are great about building partnerships, right? To give kids voice, to give families voice, to give empowerment. I always try to instruct our agencies, not that you can't be an advocate for something that you want to believe in, or that you have a certain strong feeling about, but I also believe that we have to be very committed to why we were founded, right? And within that space of being committed to why we were founded, we can affect positive change, right? It doesn't have to be either or. It's just that don't try to make yourself to be something that your organization's not. Figure out who you are and how you affect change through who you are. Does that make sense?
I have a question.
Yeah.
So you mentioned that 77% of littles are littles of color and 70% are white, bigs are white. Is there a current effort, or are you tracking how many of those littles eventually become bigs? Because it seems like that's your pool that you're trying to reach eventually. So as I shared with you,
Yeah.
I was a little a very long time ago out of New York City, and I don't ever remember thinking one day I could be a big.
Yeah.
And how do you change that narrative, and what are you potentially doing now to start to plant that seed that yes, you're a little now, but one day you too can be a big?
Thank you for your question. It is one of the centerpieces of our strategic plan. It's positioned as this major and this robust alumni outreach initiative, right? And it's at every stage and every level, right? So part of it, to your question, is how do we bring back people, right? So the folks who've been out there, who may be a little removed and say, hey, I was a big or I was a little. The other part of it is how do you keep the people you already have, right? So that's when I had talked about 18 to 25 and seeing that growth. The key to big futures is absolutely helping young people move on to the next stage. But the other key is you stay connected to these young people, right? Because you don't want to lose them. You're seeing much more growth, which I'm really proud of. And I'm not sure if there's one in Pittsburgh yet, but these young alumni advisory councils, man, there is a skyrocket that's happening around our network of these junior board. I don't know, they call them different things. Junior boards, young alumni. And what you're seeing happening is they're starting these groups up to do exactly what you're saying, right? To keep our young alumni connected and to keep them in the mix, as well as the ultimate pipeline to the board, right? So you don't have, I want to make sure I leave this conversation and I don't set you up the wrong way either, Becky. You don't have to go anywhere and radically change your board. That's not what I'm saying here. The question is how do you build a pipeline, right, that you can continue to feed your board, right? So that your board, because one of the questions we constantly have on boards, and I'm going to get back around to your question, but I just got to say this, is that we can't find the people to serve on our boards, right? And I am on a mission to dispel that, right? that we can find the people. It's about our intentionality, right? It's about our approach, about finding the right people and how we set up our infrastructure, our vision, our strategy, and our board leadership to help us find people that can feed into our board. But I use that example because you're seeing those kind of groups sprout up to keep young alumni engaged. You're seeing Big Futures now become a pipeline, not just growing to career development, but how do we keep younger alumni engaged? You're seeing even what you're going to see us, and I can't, because my team would kill me if I did this, but the new campaign that we're about to launch, I am so excited about it because it is, yes, it's going to be for, more seasoned individuals as well, but it is this very hip, edgy type of, if you're 20, 30 something, you're going to look at this new effort and you're going to be like, wow, like this is for me. I feel like I belong, I feel included, but it won't stop at a marketing campaign. It's also about how we train our staff, right? To be able to, I just told the staff about, we're seeing agencies who are doing street teams. And street teams essentially, like if you remember anything about the hip hop community, street teams were the teams that had to go on the street and sell the albums, right? And get people to buy albums. Where you're seeing our teams, our agencies who are building these street teams that are going out into communities to really hit the pavement and to talk to like younger folks about Big Brothers, Big Sisters and become a mentor, show up at parties, do the social things, right? That it doesn't just have to be a formal gathering to say, hey, be a big or a commercial, but it can be the types of ways that people actually interact in life, right? So how do you relate to people in ways that they interact in life and bring them into the community? So I want to just say kudos to what you just asked and amen to it will be a significant part of how we move forward in the next 5 years.
I found here that the young people like when I come to parties. So I've been doing that. We have time maybe for one more question, and then I would like to do a group photo so that Artis we can send that to his team who really wants to make sure he's getting photos when he's placing.
Yeah,
So,
that's right.
Colleen, you have
I would just like to say thank you for coming. I don't know why it took you 14 to get to Pittsburgh. But, and on behalf of the Mentoring Partnership, which is so proud of our Big Brothers Big Sisters chapter here in Pittsburgh, as a leader, I think the things you're talking about as far as peer learning from each other, you'll see what great example so many of the things you've already talked about have been in place or used here in our market, and we're just so proud of the team and the board over all of these years. So welcome. It was a
Thank
pleasure
you, Colleen.
knowing you with the NFL and
That's right. It's good to see you.
But the help that you can bring around raising awareness would be, I think, much needed in every market, and it would help make this job so much easier. Because once we get someone in the pipeline, I think this team is really exceptional at helping you be a great mentor, but that raising awareness to markets that maybe aren't traditionally already signing on, the group model, all of those pieces, the team here has really done a great job and wants to continue to do great work. So that whole raising awareness piece is a big challenge, and we'll challenge you to help us do it better.
And Colleen, to what you just said, which is a really excellent point and one that's sort of in our discussion on too, there are, because I think this is really important to hear, because you're going to see a lot more of this come from BBBSA nationally. The friendship, what you've just been hearing me, like more so the friendship model, which is, hey, be a mentor, have a relationship. That's gonna be a constant drumbeat, right? That never goes away. It's like the constant heartbeat of our messaging. What we're finding though is we have to have, there's not just one message. There's like a parallel message that's going on, right? And it's a broader thought leadership message. It's a broader societal message. And this is really important that I stress. Relationship, absolutely. But mentoring is not a nice to do. It's a necessity, right? That's going to be the core that what you're going to continue to hear from us, because here's what we know and what we're seeing and what the research bears out, that when you talk about almost any challenge that we're seeing that's facing young people in this country, right? Mentoring is a thread throughout all, right? So as we talk more about, and I've been in these markets, and I just not too long ago left Chicago, left Philadelphia, crime rates around our country, community violence and violence prevention, the role that mentoring can play and should play in those conversations and being supportive. We have power and we have a role to play in this, and the research backs it up. It's not just a nice to do things, it is a necessity in terms of the work we do. When you talk about mental health and what's going on with young people in mental health, suicide rates, isolation, the challenges that young people are facing, the idea is mentoring as a mental health support as part of the core equation. We're seeing that, and people are coming to the table more and more to ask questions about who are the mentoring organizations, how can we bring mentoring to the table? Absolutely, with educational success. The National Partnership for Student Success is a perfect example of that. That's happening on the federal level, and how we think about academic success and the work that's taking place there. You all know, because I don't even need to tell you about juvenile justice, right? And what's happening from a juvenile justice standpoint, and the role we should continue to play, whether it's on the side of prevention, on the side of intervention, right? That each of those sides, and even what happens when a young person or a family or a community goes through some significant trouble, right? That we have a role to play there. We have a role to play, and I'm a big believer, and thank you for all the talk that you shared with me around law enforcement in this community, right? First responders. Do we have a role to play there? Are we already playing a role there? Yes. Should we play a role there? Yes. One of the questions I was asked when I came on board was about Bigs and Blue, right? I don't shy away from controversial things, by the way. So was about Bigs and Blue. And it was like, well, should we still be doing Bigs and Blue? Should we still be advancing a program like that? And the question I got was a loaded question, but it was a question about, we're giving shine to police officers, right? With a program like that, because it puts police officers as heroes, and it's challenging to our communities, and particularly communities that feel really marginalized when it comes to law enforcement. My response to that, as being, and this was interesting because the response was right on, how does it feel to be the first Black CEO in the organization in 118 years, right? And my response to that, because I'll never forget it, my response to it was, if we're not at the table, who is? Who's at the table? If we're not at the table to have the conversation, if we're not the organization that's trying to figure out how we bring people together, who's the organization? If we have the ability to do it, it's hard stuff. This stuff is not easy. The work that these folks around the room do, it's not easy stuff. But that's why we do it. We do it to take on the hard stuff. We do it to be the advocates, to be the mentors, to be the partner for tough things, for controversial things that may happen in the lives of our communities and the young persons we face, young people and the things that they face. But that's why we are in this work, to be there and to be present. And what I believe is that when you're at the table to bring people together, when you're at the table to, even in the most dire or challenging circumstances, to be the organization that can align folks and to create partnership, that's what bigger together truly means. That's the spirit of our mission, and that's the spirit of what, as long as I'm CEO of this organization, I am gonna always align and abide by, because that's how we grow together, and that's how our young people impact, and that's how they scale, and that's how we do things to reach more kids. So thank you all for having me here. It's been a pleasure.